What first got you into jazz music?
Thank you, Andrea. It's great to be part of this day. Yeah, so basically, before I got into jazz, I just really enjoyed improvising with my sax. I really enjoyed the feeling of just making up melodies, and so for a long time, basically, I was just kind of jamming with people, and just playing, maybe just kind of more of a funk kind of thing, just jamming on a groove. So I was very much into kind of soul at that time. I was into kind of soul and funk, really. So that sort of groove-based music, but you know, I enjoyed improvising to that, and that took me that occupied me for quite a few years. So it wasn't, and I started listening to some saxophone players like Grover Washington Jr. So kind of like, sort of, I guess, kind of lightly coming into the genre, like Mr. Magic, for example. I loved that tune, the version he did. So, but it was a bit later. So it's kind of in my early 20s when I actually started really listening to jazz. So it took me quite a long time to get there, actually. But when I did, yeah, then I was, I think Coltrane was my sort of first love, and so yeah, so I guess in my early 20s I started to listen to Coltrane, but that was after like quite a long period of just being really interested in the saxophone and playing it and just improvising, enjoying myself. And I wasn't really formally trained at all until later when I went to Trinity. So, but yeah, that's how I started.
Great. Okay, Annie, would you like to tell us how you got into jazz?
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everybody. I'm Annie, and yeah, it's great to be part of this. Yeah, I was always curious about all kinds of music, and so growing up, I heard my best friend was from Barbados. I heard ska and reggae and Motown, pop music, and then Ray Charles, and then big band swing, Count Basie. And you know, I started playing at the age of 12, and by 14 I was doing gigs because my teacher had a big band, and he kind of just like sent me to gigs, and so I was kind of doing gigs with swing bands and stuff like that, and big bands, and but not improvising. That seemed to be like you know, something that kind of only like, you know, kind of exalted people did, you know. So and then at 16, I joined Ivy Benson's band, which was a swing band and a big band, and did that for 2 or 3 years. And then after that, then I started to learn to improvise by listening to people playing solos, you know, kind of looking at books, having the odd lesson, but mostly really by playing. I've never had any formal education in music, and I've taught myself to arrange, I mean, taught myself sounds really lofty. I just kind of, you know, I just learned. I always learned through people, you know, through people on the jazz scene. So by the age of 20, 21, I was playing on the jazz scene in London with, you know, and I had like many mentors and people who helped me. But yeah, so I started getting into it when I was about 18, which is a quick answer to that question.
Can I just add a couple of things? One is that there are different generations here. We're all together, and it's going to be quite interesting to see how different generations got into jazz. And absolutely. I think Annie's experience of getting into jazz is kind of the way I got into jazz a bit. Was there was no formal education, but I just managed to do 1 year of studying at the Guildhall, but that was the only course that was there. So it's quite interesting. You know, we had to, I suppose, be a little bit more proactive, but it perhaps takes you a bit longer. But it's an interesting. And the other thing is, I just wondered if you could say a little bit about the Ivy Benson Band, Annie, because I don't think that maybe many of our participants today would be aware of what an incredible band that was and why.
Yeah, well, Ivy started an all-female band during the war, because you know, a lot of the guys were they were away fighting, and So Ivy with her dad, Ivy was from Leeds, and with her dad, she started the Ivy Benson Band, and it was all women band. So she gave work to lots and lots of young women musicians, and then after the war, she carried on, and she always had a big band of like 2 or 3 trombones, 2 or 3 trumpets, 5 saxes, bass, drums, keyboards, 2 vocalists, and she had a huge pad of music that we kind of carried around in these flight cases with us. And at any night on a gig, sometimes we'd work 6 hours a night, and with kind of a few breaks, and we'd play for dancing, we'd play cabaret spots, and she'd pick out 3 numbers and we'd play them, 3 more numbers and we'd play them. All the solos were written, and there were Harry Gold's pieces of 8 arrangements, which were like really amazing, so kind of like playing the solo, kind of going, oh, so thrilling. And we had Buddy Rich arrangements, again, solos were written. And then with the vocalists, we had to kind of transpose at a minute's notice because they all sang in different keys. So, I mean, it was an incredible experience for a 16-year-old. And I really did learn a lot there in that band.
Excellent. I'm going to go on to Cherise now. Cherise, do you want to tell us how you got into jazz music?
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello to every little black square and everyone on the panel. Thank you for having me. So I'm coming at it from more of a vocal perspective, obviously, because I'm a vocalist. I'd say that I started to take jazz quite a lot more seriously when I was 16, because I thought I really want to be a singer, but I was looking at the music industry and how it worked. In 2011, when I was 16, Amy Winehouse passed away at 27 years old. And she was a commercially successful artist who had a lot of jazz influence. I looked at the ways that her career wasn't supported in the turbulence that there was in the music industry. And I thought to myself, I want to choose a part of the music industry in which skill is revered more than looks and image and sensationalism, where I can grow as a musician past the age of 27. And then I looked more and more into Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Betty Carter, Carmen McRae. For any of you singers, those 4 queens, you better know them. And they all were given the chance to age like fine wines into their 50s, 60s, until their death. They were respected for the integrity of their art. So I went to jazz, and it was also thinking, how do I gain skill in music that is of the Black diaspora, the African diaspora. Sure, there were pop courses here and there, but at 16, you're made to decide what you want to do for the rest of your life. I know that some of you are in year 11, so I empathize with the experience that you're going through right now. When choosing to go, looks like in these institutions, there was classical music, and then if you wanted to do something that was to do with anything to do with Black music, it was jazz on the inverted commas elite level. So I think I chose that, and but those decisions were being made and bashed about within the most supportive community, which was Tomorrow's Warriors, which is the organization that Janine runs, who is a box over from me right now. Without Janine, I wouldn't have the career that I have now, because all of these questions about how I can be who I want to be in the music industry, they were asked in an environment that Tomorrow's Warriors provided. And I'm sure you're going to use your own time to describe exactly what Tomorrow's Warriors is, but those are the decisions that led me to become a jazz singer. And scene. Done.
Thank you, Cherise. I'm just going to go over to Janine, because that leads nicely to Janine about perhaps why did you decide to start Tomorrow's Warriors?
It was more well, actually, it wasn't by accident. It was very much by design. When, you know, I used to work in, well, I actually started off working in music. My first office job was for Boozy and Hawkes, the music publishers. And for various, I didn't stay long there, partly because the pay was so appalling. But it's when I met Gary. I was working in the city of London in the financial district. And I was really fed up because my background had always been in the arts. You know, I studied classical piano, and at one point I was destined to become a classical pianist. I also studied dance at Laban, actually. And so I had the whole artistic thing was always around me. And I grew up listening to jazz. You know, my parents loved jazz. And I remember dancing around this room that I'm actually in as a child. I was dancing to, you know, Duke Ellington and Count Basie and all of that. So anyway, when I was in the city, I hated it. I thought they were all Philistines and just focused on making loads of money. And so I looked for something creative to do and started photography. And it was through photography, that's Gary in the background shouting, through photography I met Gary at a gig, a Jazzin' for Jamaica gig at the Union Chapel. And we got talking and he bought some of my photographs. And he introduced me to a whole new scene at the Jazz Cafe that I knew nothing about. And it was all, you know, really fantastic young musicians, a lot of Black musicians that I'd never seen, didn't know anything about them, didn't know they existed. And as I got to start working with Gary, I started to wonder, you know, what is going on? Why can't I see any of these amazing young musicians, you know, in magazines, in the newspapers? Why are they being sort of pigeonholed into small venues and not getting the opportunities that I could see other white musicians getting? So, you know, we just started to, you know, throw around some ideas and focused particularly on his group at the time, New Troupe. I just started giving them some support with press releases, photographs, all of that, to help give them a leg up, you know, make them more visible. And I suppose that really was the start of Tomorrow's Warriors. It was to bring focus to the young musicians from the public and from the media, but also to start putting in place a framework for development, to give them a platform and a regular platform that they could continually develop their skills and also build their networks, you know, all of that stuff that you need to be able to survive as a musician. You know, you can't do it alone. It takes a village, we always say. And so building that village, and I think building that community is what Tomorrow's Warriors was really all about.
Thank you very much, Janine. Some ways I wish I was a lot younger and I could have had the opportunity of coming up through your organisation, because it is great. I love the idea how you develop and you don't just like abandon people when they've you know, grown up. You still support them, and that's kind of what I think we should do more in society. Really, it's really help people get on, you know, not just because they've, you know, they get to 18, oh, you're out on your own. You know, I like that idea of you know, giving people a really good start in life. I'm going to I think I've asked everyone except for Sheila and Gabby, so I'm going to go on to Sheila next. Would you like to tell us how you got into jazz music?
Sorry, I need to unmute myself. Hi everyone, hope you're all well. So I got into jazz through, I guess I played trumpet, so I wasn't really into playing classical music. And at the age of 13, 14, I got introduced to an organization called Kinetic Blocko via my teacher. And Kinetic Blocko is basically a an organization for young people to participate in a summer school. And the good thing about Connecticut Blocker is that you basically end up learning loads of different types of music. And through that, I ended up, learning a lot more about jazz. And it was a slow journey for me. It was a slow burner through like learning about funk and music of the world, I guess. So Afrobeat, music from South America, and all of, great music. I then got introduced to Tomorrow's Warriors, just like Cherise as well. But I was essentially followed a bunch of other great horn players in Connecticut Blocker that I admired, like Mark, Ruben, Theo, Nathaniel, and I saw that they were getting so much better at their instrument. And I used to ask them, what are you guys doing? And they'd be like, oh, I'm going to Tomorrow's Warriors, a jam session at Slice of Life. And I remember being like, okay, I'm going to go this week, but I never ended up going. And then I think I was about 18, 19 at this time. And I had no more no more college. And there was no more outlet for me to play my trumpet. So I decided to just bite the bullet and go to one of the sessions. And yeah, ever since I went to the session with Tomorrow's Warriors, I never stopped going. But it took me a long time to grow confidence in playing my horn one and just exploring jazz. But yeah, it was a slow burner. And I eventually went to Trinity at the age of 24, I believe. So prior to that, I was studying art while still going to Tomorrow's Warriors as well. So yeah, it was a slow, but yeah, I don't regret any decisions I made because yeah, it all,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. I'm going to move on to Gabby. You're still currently a third-year student at Trinity. So how did you get into jazz music?
So like Sheila, it was quite a slow burner for me as well. I started playing bass guitar because my school jazz band needed a bass guitarist, and I played guitar, so I thought, oh, I'll just try it. It's basically the same strings. So that got me into bass guitar, and through that I was offered an opportunity to join an Easter jazz course, which was run by Phil Meadows, and it had some amazing musicians leading it, like Laura Jerd and Alice Savadsky and Gareth LaCrane. And through that I made a whole bunch of friends, and I just found this real sense of community with people who were playing jazz. And I loved that when we went to jams, anyone could get up and play. It didn't matter if you were amazing or if you were just starting out. As long as you could get through the chord changes, you could be a part of it. And for that sense of community really encouraged me to start going to organisations like Tomorrow's Warriors. I actually started by going to NIJO, and then I took a few years to study classical music because that was what I'd always played classical music. And then thanks to Tomorrow's Warriors, they sent me to this jazz course in America called Jazz House Kids Summer Camp. And it had some amazing musicians like Christian McBride. It had musicians from Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra like Marcus Printup, and just loads of really inspirational people. Slide Hampton, who's now like 70 or 80, he came to the workshop to see what we were doing. It was really inspirational few weeks. And although that summer, when that summer ended, I was supposed to start first year classical at Guildhall. I really wanted to study jazz, so I ended up finishing my first year at Guildhall and then switching to the jazz course at Trinity, and I'm loving it.
Well, that's nice to know. Nice story there. I'm going to finish off this just a little bit about how I got into jazz music, and I'm going to segue into the next question. And from now on, some of the questions we won't be asking the whole panel, so because obviously I wanted everyone to have a good chat there, but there's quite a few questions and we've only got half an hour to get through them, so don't be offended, panel members, if I don't ask you every single question. But as I said, if any panel member has a burning desire to say something, please put your hand up and I will obviously honour your desires, as we say. I got into jazz music because my dad was a jazz pianist. I played classical piano. I always got into anything rhythmic, Bartok, I loved it. When I was a kid, and I'm not that old, but when I was a kid, there was almost nothing for a child to play that wasn't classical. It was incredible because literally when I got to about grade 8 standard, the amount of material in the market was there, Christopher Norton, all these jazzy things. So I kind of really had no chance of learning it. I just had to listen to my dad and his jazz records, which I thought was his music, wasn't my music at all, until I heard Barbara Thompson. Barbara Thompson is a jazz saxophonist. At the time, she used to have a band called Paraphernalia, which kind of mixed with rock. And I thought, wow, this is totally cool, totally cool. I was also going to the Midland Youth Jazz Orchestra and gaining my jazz chops through that. And, you know, I'm sure everybody here is willing to have a go at improvising or has some experience. But, you know, you can probably all remember that first moment of someone going, do a solo, improvise, and you'd be like, what, and that absolute terror, you know, and so that was obviously a very good place to learn, and a nice safe environment, which I think is always really, really good. And then I did a classical degree, and then I did because there weren't any jazz degree courses again. There was one jazz course, but that you didn't get a degree at the end of it. So anyway, I did the summer school at the Guildhall, and I met some great people, and they were all going to do the 1-year jazz course at the Guildhall, and they were like, oh, you should definitely do it, you know, it's really good. And it just gave me the confidence to apply for it, got on the course and absolutely loved it, and, you know, never looked back since then. So that's my way I got into jazz music. I'm going to segue into another question, and the question is, sorry, that first question was from Eloise, so thank you, Eloise, for sending that in. The second question, I think this is one of Neil's. How does today's jazz scene compare to 20, 30 years ago in terms of the prevalence of female musicians? What more needs to be done to address that imbalance? And I'm briefly just going to say a little bit about that. My personal opinion, because I think unless you're actually researching it and can give us actual figures. I've done a little bit of research on women studying, female musicians studying jazz, but this is, you know, talking about the jazz scene. My feeling is that being a woman now playing jazz, you're much more likely to get accepted as an equal. And that's one of the things I think is fantastic. I see some great female jazz musicians making their way through the scene. I see how they're accepted by everybody. It appears that. And I mean, my personal opinion, my thoughts of 20, 30 years ago is that there was this, it was quite tricky. You felt like you were constantly having to prove yourself. And there was, I think, you know, it was mostly men playing jazz. So as a woman, you know, it's that thing when you're a minority, you feel you've got to be not just good, you've got to be really, really good. And that's quite a lot of pressure, and it's quite hard to shed that. It's actually something I found in lockdown. I've been quite relaxed because I haven't felt I've had to prove myself all the time, but it's a nagging feeling there. So I think it's been really difficult for women of my age and older to be able to work in the jazz scene. And I still think that my age group finds it very difficult to see women as equals. But my feeling is I watched, you know, Gabby at college, I watched people like Sheila, Cherise and Dee, and it seems to me that the attitude now is that everyone is on an equal level. It feels like that. And I attribute some of that, not all of it, a lot of it to the jazz education and the development of jazz education with a clear path of how to study it. And so you don't have that thing where you have to learn on the job because someone's booked you or go to a jam session. So I think jazz education has always been a very clear way of readdressing the gender balance. There still is our issues there, but for me, it seems that it's getting better. So the question of what needs to be done to address that imbalance, I think it is being addressed. I think there are many organisations in the last 5 years, Tomorrow's Warriors, a classic example, that do have extra, you know, they make an extra effort in how to address this. And maybe at that point, maybe I should go over to Janine and just ask you about that, about the jazz scene 20 or 30 years ago, and how to address the imbalance, and has it been addressed?
Well, it's certainly better today than it was all that time ago. I mean, you know, like I said, when we started Tomorrow's World, I could barely see any female instrumentalists there, and that was always a concern. A lot of the women in jazz then, certainly in the scene that I was working in, they were generally vocalists. There weren't that many instrumentalists coming through. And so I think it's more when we went to the South Bank in 2009, when we got that residency at the South Bank, and we were able to open it up and let, you know, encourage more girls and young women to come along and, you know, brave it out with the boys. You know, I mean, Sheila was one of the first group, I think, of girls that came through. And I think what made the difference for them is, you know, we set up the female collective to give you know, time and space for the girls to work in a very safe and secure environment, and a nurturing environment where they could look after each other and also encourage each other along, you know, push each other along. But it wasn't to the exclusion of the regular sessions, it was in addition to. So they were still having to go and you know, hang out with the boys and play along with the boys and take the pressure, you know, and you know, fortunately, I think having girls in the same session kind of calms down the boys to some degree, you know. I think, and they were strong girls, actually. They were pretty formidable women. And so it's kind of educating the boys at the same time, you know, and making them grow up far more open, really, to working with women and getting used to working with women. I know certainly when I first met Gary, I mean, there were some really awful guys out there who were really quite dismissive and rude about women, you know. You know, they're all of an age now, and you know, they're always going to be miserable and hateful of women. You know, that's their problem. But I think today, you know, the new generations coming through, they're used to working around girls and women, you know, and they're far more respectful and encouraging, I think, and supportive of women. So yeah, I think we're in a much better place now than we ever were.
Yeah, I was actually coming to you, Annie. You were one of my chosen people since you were around 20 or 30 years ago. So you have personal experience of that. So how does it compare to 20 and 30 years ago, do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot more women around, which is great. I did a gig at one of the first Bracknell Jazz Festivals, and a broadcaster called Charles Fox interviewed me, and his first question was, why do you think you're the only woman instrumentalist on this whole festival?
Wow.
And that just kind of really shocked me, and I didn't have the answer either. I just kind of went, oh, I don't know. What I have to say about that scene at that time was, and just to go back a little bit, I mean, I grew up, I was always in brass bands. I was taught with boys, what Janine was saying. You know, I was taught with boys, and so I was pretty tough, and I was also better than them, kind of like right from the start, you know. So I knew that I was a good player, and I did have some confidence, and then when I came to London, as I said, I met people like, you know, I played with John Stevens, Harry Beckett, Dudu Pukwana, Peniz Saul, you know, and also the Brotherhood of Breath later on with Jazz Jamaica All Stars, and that was later on as well. But what I found amongst jazz musicians mostly was a real warmth, you know, and I think those musicians who kind of just love the music, you know, they might have had their attitudes towards me as a woman, and a lot of them did, from being, you know, from fancying me, you know, and all of that lot. So you're kind of having to deal with that, you know, to being dismissive. But there really was enough, sorry about that horrible noise, there really was enough people around in the jazz scene to, you know, to support me, and they wanted to support me, which was really lovely. There was a kind of whole mentoring scene. So I really go by what Janine said as well, is educating the boys. I did a talk, I taught for a little while at the Royal Academy, and I did a talk there for the students. And I remember one, you know, we were talking about one of the guys, one of the guy musicians said, yeah, you know, when a woman plays a solo, it's like the whole place goes crazy afterwards. It's like, oh, how fantastic, you know, a woman played a solo, you know. And when I play a solo, it's like they're just like talking through it, you know, as a little ripple of applause, you know. And so I kind of came to see that there was, you know, the audience treats women differently as well. Everybody was treating women differently, and you know, to kind of help the both, because loads of times I felt really ashamed on stage when I did a solo, and you know, I get a huge reaction, and then afterwards, you know, Fires, Virgie or somebody would play a solo who's an incredible musician, and not so much, you know. So I think it's education all round, and I think people now are also getting more used to seeing women musicians playing, which is a really good thing, you know. And so what more needs to be done to address that imbalance? I mean, I really applaud all the people that are working, and I also applaud all the young women who are coming forward and playing, you know, because it is a tough life, a jazz life, you know. And I remember one time speaking to a young woman, this was probably about 30 years ago, and she said, I don't know whether I want to do this, you know, it's so tough. And so, you know, I think some women maybe a bit more sensitive, you know, just a little bit more sensitive, and they don't want to kind of run that gauntlet all the time. So I'm so glad that, you know, that's being broken down. That's all I have to say.
We do have, thank you, Anna. We do have some, I mean, I think some very strong women. Well, they're all strong women that are here today, because they all play in their own groups, and they've led bands, and they're doing really well. But I just wanted to say something, that one of the group that's one of the teachers that sometimes joins in on this is Laura Jerd. And just a little story. I remember when Laura was a student at Trinity, and she was saving all I think she was saving all her student grant to make an album, and she said to me, oh, I'm going to print up 1,000. And I was like, you know, you can print up like 500 now, you don't have to do 1,000. And I remember her saying to me, oh no, I'm going to sell 1,000. And I was like, oh my God, this girl, she's so believing in herself. And I think that believe in yourself is so important. And also, you know, that's kind of how you make it, I think, just believing in yourself. I'm going to move on, because there are many questions, and some of them probably are more interesting to some people than others. This one, I hopefully will be of interest to all of our participants. And it says, why should a teenager today focus on learning jazz when there's so many other types of music they could get into? Now, we don't have any teenagers in our panel, I don't think, but I thought we'd go to maybe a couple of the younger ones. So Cherise, would you like to answer that question?
Ooh, it's a very good question. Gosh, I'd say I'd kind of pivot back to what I was mentioning when I was 16. I was kind of thinking, what is the root of everything that I love? And when you look at modern music, you'll be hard pressed to find an avenue that didn't start with the blues, with jazz. So I'd say it's a wise decision, whether you end up being a jazz musician or spending, I don't know, a month or two on it. Just having anchoring yourself in the knowledge of the jazz tradition and the jazz culture will mean that you're gaining a base. It's like jazz is Latin, and there are so many different languages that have come out of it all. I'd say.
Do you feel, sorry, Cherise, do you feel that the thing about jazz is the creativity? I mean, that's maybe, how would that compare to other music? I mean, is there something about jazz that allows you to be much more creative, or are there other pop musics that have that same level of creativity? through improvisation, I'm thinking, really.
Yeah. Well, that's a good pivot, I suppose. At the moment, I spend most of my time in songwriting sessions with pop producers. And what I'm finding quite interesting is that we'll both have the same thoughts or the same intuition that a song should go a certain way. And then I'll be like, oh, well, we should just do a major 7. And they'll be looking at me like, and I'm like, if we like go down a 5th, and then I'll just like play some basic chords on the piano, and I'll be like, tell me the individual notes. I'm like, C, E. So, and so I don't necessarily think that all of the language that we acquire as jazz musicians is essential, because clearly there are different genres in which you don't really need it. But that level of knowledge to back up my creativity and to back up our creativity, I think speaks to how resilient you can become as a jazz musician. It's attached to backing up your integrity as a woman operating in this music industry as well, and to any singers, because I know I think I'm the only singer on the panel. Oftentimes most of the women are singers, or it's been seen as that, right? So sometimes you're seen as a bit of a garnish on the top of an ensemble to look pretty, sing the nice song, and that people get onto the intellectual stuff. But studying jazz in the same way that everybody else has means that you're able to speak the same language. And in those moments where you may feel like you're being dismissed, or where I may have felt like I'm being dismissed, I can read, write, do absolutely everything that everybody else can. So it's a really, really, really good grounding. Now, if I go into soul, if I go into pop, jazz is always going to be at the heart. And I think that serves.
That's a really good point, Cherise. And I mean, I hadn't really thought about an answer for that question, but I think, from what you're saying, basically, if you do a jazz degree, it's a flexible degree. It gives you the high level of training that, say, a classical, course would do, but also it gives you the knowledge about chords and soloing, and so you can move with equal ease into the pop world, or the non-classical world. So.
Yeah. Gonna keep giving. It's gonna keep giving. Yeah.
I was going to ask our youngest member of the team here, Gabby, because it wasn't too long ago that she was a teenager. So why should a teenager today focus on learning jazz when there's so many other types of music they could get into? Have you got anything to say on that subject?
Yeah, a little bit to say. I think really the sense of community that it gives you. Jazz opens a door to a lot of different genres of music in a way that other genres that are usually studied, like classical, maybe might not, because you've got so much to back up your musical understanding, and there's so many different avenues that you don't tend to go down. I mean, especially, like, I much prefer studying a jazz degree than a classical degree, because the theory, I think the approach to theory and the different modes gives you lots of different scales, and it's more focused on like your oral understanding and your like memorizing tunes, your harmony, and sight reading is also useful in jazz. But I think it just opens the door to so many genres that are popular at the moment, and yeah, it just gives you a really good grounding.
And it's good fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Janine's got her hand up. Janine, what would you like to say?
I think that there's one thing that's been really important to all of you as women, and that is longevity in jazz. Yeah, because with pop music in particular, so much of it is going to be about your looks and about looking young all the time, and the whole objectivity, so definitely longevity. You get those skills, they are lifelong, and they will keep you working right on to, jazz musicians don't die, or they don't retire, they die in the end, but and you'll be able to stay that course as great musicians and be valued for your skills as musicians, rather than with other genres where, you know, once you get past 25, 30, 35, it's like, you know what, they're already looking at the younger people. So I think that is one of the best reasons, if you know, as a musician, to stay with jazz. Yeah,
that's great. I'm going to move on to another couple of questions, and then I'm going to finish off with a question which probably would be more relevant for the whole panel. There's one of the questions was, how good do you need to be by the time you're 18 to get into music college, or to be seriously considering a career in music? And I was going to answer this because I teach at Trinity Laban, and first of all, I would like to say that this day that we run was partly set up to encourage girls to play jazz, but also one of my thoughts was it would allow potential people who thought that they might like to do a jazz degree course to come and see whether they like it, and to get some feedback. And I was hoping to give feedback to say, oh, you're ready, or, you know, maybe you need another year or something like that. So first of all, that's kind of was one of my aims of this jazz day. How good do you need to be? I would say, well, you need to be pretty good, because it's a conservatoire and a music college. Sorry, this is a bit of Trinity Laban promotion here. But any music college obviously will have those same high levels, because it's a performance course. And so it says, how good do you need to be, and or to be seriously considering a career in music? So there are any sort of grades particularly. I mean, there are saxophone jazz grades, but you could be grade 8 and still not get on a course. It doesn't really lead to that. So my thoughts are, if you're serious about becoming a professional musician, or if you're, you know, want to see, you know, if you want to work at your jazz playing, I think taking part in organisations like Tomorrow's Warriors, like the National Youth Jazz Collective, like National Youth Jazz Orchestra, or the Niger Academy, there are many organisations. I think Trinity Laban are going to set up something in the autumn for girls and jazz with Tomorrow's Warriors, well, presumably once lockdown has sort of fizzled out a bit, if it does. So that getting involved in something like that, or a summer school or something, so your first experience of jazz isn't coming to an audition, because I think you need to have that under your belt. You need to be of a high level on your instrument. This is if you think you were doing a classical degree, you would be expected to be grade 8. So, you know, that's a high level on any instrument. So, you know, if you've only been learning a couple of years, unless you've been like Charlie Parker practicing 8 hours a day, you know, it's going to take you a while. But as I said, you know, do join in on some of these organisations, and I think they'll also give you feedback about how your level is. But also, you know, if you don't decide to go down that route, and you just want to, you know, work at it yourself, joining those sort of organisations will help. You know, not everyone has to do a jazz degree to be a professional musician, but it does help. So I was just going to move on to the next question, unless anyone had anything burning to add to that.
Sorry.
It says, oh, sorry, no, it's fine, Cherise. So yeah, sorry.
Speaking to the value of what you just said, a lot of the organizations that Andrea is putting forward are free or being made available to you at a subsidized or reduced rate. And the version of what the experiences and the intervention that you're getting now, for me, it was like pay between 60 or 90 pounds for a consultation with a private jazz musician at one of these conservatoires to try and figure out how they operate. And for a lot of people, we don't have that kind of money. So through Tomorrow's Warriors, through what Andrea and Trinity are providing here, you're getting this priceless opportunity to ask questions. So I just add in there, like, it's so valuable. So yeah.
Thank you. The next question that I was going to do before the final question, so just a quick response here, if possible. I was going to ask Gabby, what does a typical day studying jazz look like? Could you answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's a bit.
No, not now, not now, not now. Nothing's typical now. Go on.
Yeah, but when I'm studying at Trinity, a typical day looks like some practice in the morning on my own or with a band, if I can get them together early in the morning. Um, and then there's a bunch of different classes. So we have music history, where we discuss like the history of jazz, and as you progress through the years, you have a chance to do your own project. So I chose to look into Ray Brown specifically. He's a great jazz bassist, if you haven't heard of him. And you can sort of, as the course goes on, you can kind of mold your own days, but typically you have like a couple of bands that you play in, and some of the bands are like very repertoire based, so they'll focus on one jazz musician and you'll play their music for a term or so. Yeah, just a lot of playing music.
It's a practical course, isn't it? I think that's something that that's typical of a conservatoire. There is an academic element, isn't there? But it's play as much as you can, really, isn't it?
Yeah. So there's classes on improvisation. There's classes on composition. So the history and also small bands. But you have small bands and also there's big band opportunity and a lot of different projects. One thing that sets Trinity apart from the other conservatoires as well is collab. We get 2 weeks where you can do a project either for 1 week or 2 weeks. And this year I did Andrew's project, which was South African jazz. So we spent a week playing lots of South African jazz in a group. Some of the classical musicians joined in, and some of the projects you do with the dancers as well, which can be quite good fun.
Yes, thank you for that little bit of publicity there. And that, to mention on that note, we had Francis Fuster also co-leading, who was Hugh Masekela's percussionist and played with on the Gracelands album, Paul Simon. So it was a real honour for everyone, I think. Annie, you've just put your hand up. Did you want to add something to that?
I just wanted to say it'd be really nice to hear from Dee and Sheila, maybe, just for a kind of different perspectives.
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes left, so
haven't heard from them yet.
Yeah, I was going to bring them in on the next question. I would say the fact their names are under the next question, but thank you for that. And the final question, unless you want to talk about a typical jazz day, Sheila, but it's been a few years, isn't it, since you were at Trinity, and it wasn't even the same head of jazz then. So, Sheila, and I'll ask Dee afterwards, and then if we've got any time, because we only got 5 minutes, so if you could keep it quite succinct, that'd be good. This was, how have you found keeping on making music during the lockdown, especially as it's not been possible to gig and play with others?
I think this has been a great time a time of self-reflection, one. And two, I think it's just been great to just listen to music, one, as well. Just really engage with music and just sit down and be still and listen to music. And I found making music quite a lot easier, I guess. There's a lot less to worry about in terms of things to do. So I guess there's a different type of freedom in terms of being creative at home. And I bought some nice techie stuff that I'm playing around with. And I've just been making loads of different types of demos. Just been practicing, just to keep it short. Yeah. Thank you,
Sheila. Dee, what about you?
It's been, like Sheila, it's been a reflective time. One thing I'm really happy about is I have been doing some online teaching, which I felt has helped me to keep motivated. That kind of contact with younger musicians, and so a lot of the people I'm teaching are studying jazz improvisation. So I feel like it's keeping me connected to the music and keeping me motivated actually to sort of explore things and practice. I've also got an audio interface finally. I've got an audio interface, and I've sort of been trying out stuff on Ableton, doing some recording. I've also got an effects, some effects pedals, so I was kind of recording them, enjoying, basically exploring it without without being on a gig and worrying about whether it's going to feed back and all those kind of things. But also I feel like it's been a really good opportunity for me to really just reset actually, and just think, what are my goals? What are my motivations? What is my intention behind what I'm doing? Do I like the direction I'm going in? How would I want to change it? And I think, so it's important. I think this has been an enforced period of reflection, but I think periods of reflection are really important to sort of just assess, where have we got to? Do we like where we have got to? What would we like to change? And the last thing I'd say is that I think it's really, really important to develop a sort of sense of self-acceptance and sort of celebrating your individuality. And however you do that, like I've been doing this sort of funny artworks, but just anything that makes you like feel confident about yourself, because in fact what we're doing is we're presenting ourselves as musicians out into the world. And so this kind of inner work is really important, just to kind of nurture ourselves. And this is not just about playing our instrument, but it's about our sort of inner journey through life, as will be expressed through our instrument when we play. So I think it's been a good time for that, for reflection for me. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dee. I'm going to have to wrap it up now because it's just about 12 o'clock, and I feel that this panel has got so many really, really lovely answers and really educated and thoughtful conversations. But unfortunately, the clock is ticking away, and we have a whole day of whole afternoon of jazz activities. So on that note, I think according to my timetable here, there's a 10-minute break for some of the participants and tutors, and for some of us there's a 20-minute break. So I'm going to stop talking now and we'll have our 10-minute break. Thank you very much. See you soon.